How did that program begin? Were you already in touch with some of these other research organizations that deal with sharks in South Africa, or is this was sort of your brainchild and you went to somebody and said, hey, I would like to start this program? Because it's really difficult to start a program just on someone's own without having partners. I mean, tags can be expensive, and just the knowledge of tagging. How did that program begin? I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, so at the time and still today, there's an organization in KwaZulu-Natal, so on the northeast coast of South Africa, called the Oceanographic Research Institute. And they had started a tagging program where they got recreational anglers to start tagging fish on their behalf and submitting the tag information to them, that they then collated and put into large databases, and were able to write various papers and also used for various management decisions at the time with regards to certain fish species in South Africa. So it was a reasonably widely known program at the time, and I got hold of them. And I think in those days you paid a few bob to get a tagging kit, and you got a couple of instructions and off you go. And that is essentially how I got involved with the tagging side of things. And it was incredible, to be able to go and take these huge sharks out of the nets, and you're holding on to a 2.8 meter, what is that, an 8-9 foot bronze whaler shark or big sand tiger, and you take this animal out of the nets that would have died, then you measure it, and you've got dozens and dozens of people watching all of this happening, and they're used to seeing these animals being killed, and then suddenly you letting them help you take this animal and put it back in the water. It was an incredible experience, because not only were you contributing towards science and the local knowledge, but more importantly, you were educating them in a hands-on way where you took them from being essentially having this indoctrination of sharks kill to now, hang on, we've just helped this amazing animal and I don't want to see it die. So, over the years, I think I went to probably close on 800 different nettings, and you'd have sometimes 1,000 people at some of these nettings, and yeah, it was an amazing educational tool. And to this day, this is now, jeepers, nearly 40 years, 35 years later, I still walk on Muizenberg Beach many days, and I still have people coming up to me, complete strangers, and say, hey, do you remember when we put that shark or that big ray back? And it made a huge impact on people. And I don't think you can ever lose sight of the fact that if you help one animal, you made a difference to that animal. And, you don't always have to save the world. You can start in your own back garden. I think that's really important.
And I got to add that, going back 30, 35 years ago, I know when I was there, it was pretty typical, as Chris just explained, about when they'd catch a shark, they would just kill the shark and just leave it on the beach or dump it. Whereas there's been this whole sea change. It's very common for them to tag and release sharks. It's pretty unusual for them to actually keep them unless they're going to eat them. And Chris, would you think with the tagging program had a lot to do with that, changing people's attitudes?
Yeah, Dave, I think, look, it certainly played a part, I think documentaries, especially natural history ones, have played a part in that. Ironically, it's very much a double-edged sword for me. Recreational fishing for sharks, I think that played a part in it as well, because as with hunters, and I'm not a hunter, I'm firmly against not killing animals for trophies, but a lot of hunters are also people that have got a tremendous fascination and love of wildlife. And with the recreational fishermen, who were catching sharks, it was the same thing, that instead of killing them, they started catching them. And when they started catching them and handling them and releasing them, they developed a love for them, and they didn't want to see them being killed. And then that became very popular in South Africa through mainstream TV programs, that became really big in this country, where you saw guys going and fishing for sharks and releasing them. So people suddenly were seeing on TV, we don't kill these things anymore, we let them go. And I think over time, what also happened is, instead of just going out and catching this thing and gaffing it and pulling on the rocks and handling it in a rough way and taking a really lousy measurement, people started refining that, and they started handling these animals a lot better. So that changed over time. So everything with conservation, as with photography, is an evolution. You don't find your style the first time you go out there. And I think, it certainly has changed. Whether it's changed enough, I don't necessarily think so. I think there are huge pressures facing sharks today just by the volume of people that there are on this planet. But I think the general perception towards these animals has certainly changed considerably in the last 30 years, undoubtedly, and hopefully it continues to do so. It's always a battle. It's kind of like the wave of negativity towards sharks kind of fights off against those who are trying to help it. And at the end of the day, you hope that the tide of change outweighs that of oppression and killing. We always fight. We're always fighting the darkness of the killing of sharks. So we carry on.
Sure.
Well, there was, and again, we've mentioned this on other shows, but South Africa was the first country in the world to protect white sharks. And, people today, and that was 30, 31, 32 years ago. And like people today, they sort of think like, oh, we're going to protect this species, that species. It's almost like a passive thing, whereas at the time it was so revolutionary. And I was actually still there in South Africa and was involved in that early stages. And it was just such a huge change. And I think, did you think that had help, Chris, as far as like some of the other people changing people's attitudes towards sharks when they protected white sharks in South Africa?
Yeah, Dave, that's a really interesting question. I've never kind of thought of that before, but I do think it had an impact because it made them high-profile animals, and more high-profile than they were, and it was a different profile, right? Because at that stage we had no sharks that were being protected as far as I can remember. So suddenly the paradigm shift was there in that. Well, if we're protecting it, it must be in danger. So people suddenly, the penny dropped that, hey, hang on, sharks can be in danger. So I think probably in that way, it had a significant impact, and it was, as you say, the first country in the world to protect great white sharks in 1991. And, I think a lot of South Africans were very proud of it. I mean, we all used to drive around with stickers on the back of our cars that said, protect the great white. And it was actually the diagram, the sketch that was used was from your book. I still remember it. And everybody had those stickers back then. And I think it created a mindset shift